For today's video, I am so excited to do a deep dive on somebody that I feel like introduced me to reality TV, and I am forever grateful. Today we are talking about all things Kourtney Kardashian. Let's dive on in. Kourtney Mary Kardashian was born April 18th, 1979 to Kris and Robert Kardashian. She was born in LA, and she's the oldest of the Kardashian and Jenner crew. A couple of facts to know about Kourtney before we dive into the reality television of Kourtney. Number one, Kourtney was about 10 years old when Kris Jenner and Robert Kardashian had actually divorced. Not only did they divorce when she was young, but then a few years later, her dad actually ended up defending O.J. Simpson on his trial, while her mom was best friends with the person that O.J. Simpson was accused of killing. So I'm sure there was a lot of tension and unrest in the home at that time. And then unfortunately in 2003, when Kourtney was in her early 20s, her dad had actually passed away due to cancer. Another interesting fact about Kourtney is that she's the only female Kardashian Jenner who ended up going and graduating from college. She graduated from University of Arizona with a degree in theater arts and a minor in Spanish. Last but not least, Kourtney was actually on a reality show before Keeping Up with the Kardashians was ever a thing. Kourtney was on a show called Filthy Rich Cattle Drive, and the whole concept was taking these filthy rich kids out of their life of luxury, and these were kids that were typically well known or came from well-known families, and so they were taken out of their life of luxury and put on a dude ranch, and they were expected to understand manual labor and how to take care of things, and all their luxuries were taken away. So that leads me to 2007 when Keeping Up with the Kardashians officially premiered. When Keeping Up with the Kardashians had officially come out in 2007, they were previously known again for a couple of things, but nobody had known who they really were. So I think the idea was to get a camera in their house and just show the world who the Kardashians / Jenners were, whatever the case may be. Now, Kourtney, like I mentioned, is the oldest of the Kardashian and Jenner crew. But at that time, when the show had started, Kim Kardashian, who's the second oldest, she was in a place where she was getting more notoriety, whether it's due to her friendship with Paris Hilton or the fact that a certain tape had come out of her and her ex-boyfriend, who was her boyfriend at the time. If you know, you know. And so when the show came out, Kim was getting these opportunities, whether it was for modeling, whether it was for brand deals, whether it was for certain things. But at the time, all three sisters, Kourtney, Kim, and Khloe, had owned a store named Dash. And then all of a sudden, as Kim is getting more opportunities, it seemed that Kourtney and Khloe were over Dash more than Kim was. Now, Kim became the face of a lot of things. And I think literally since the beginning of it, there was a lot of resentment and tension, especially between Kourtney and Kim. Oftentimes people assume that Kim is the oldest because I think of her demeanor and how strong she typically comes off, while Kourtney, I think, struggles with finding her identity as being the oldest sister. As somebody who's the oldest of 6 kids myself, I can definitely relate to that. I feel like I have siblings who are just much stronger in their demeanor and much more assertive, and I'm just not that way. And I think for Kourtney, there was a lot of times where she was assertive, but it felt like it wasn't assertive enough because people still looked to Kim. I also think at that time in the beginning, when Kim was starting to become more notarized or people were wanting to work with her, not everyone, I think that created a bond between Khloe and Kourtney. And for a long time, it seemed that Kourtney and Khloe were the closest out of the siblings. It seemed that Kourtney and Khloe had the most fun together. They were the most like-minded, or that maybe Khloe was the most accepting of what Kourtney believed or what her values were. And it seems like Khloe, for everybody, is that safe person. And I think for Kourtney, Khloe was definitely that safe person. I always think about the time when Kim, I think, was getting like a Bentley, and Kourtney and Khloe and Rob were talking at Rob's apartment about this interaction with the salesperson. And you see Kim come to the apartment and like start just hitting Khloe. And I think of that because I'm like, Kourtney and Khloe were always on the same page, or they always had that understanding of like, okay, Kim is becoming bigger than us, bigger than herself, and it's seeming to happen fast and without us. And so I think that mutual understanding and that mutual acknowledgement created a connection that was just very unique to them. Not only did they have Keeping Up with the Kardashians, but a few years later, there would be other shows like Kourtney and Kim Take New York, Kourtney and Khloe Take Miami, Kourtney and Kim Take Miami. So Kourtney was always involved, heavily involved when it came to putting her life out there, when it came to being a producer's dream, when it came to being what her family needed. She seemed to meet the expectation and went above and beyond. However, looking back, I think the lack of boundaries when it came to what she put out there, or when it came to what people were and weren't allowed to film, I think that led to a lot of tension and led to a lot of unhealthiness, and it led to a lot of needing to heal from things that probably should never have happened in the first place. One of the prime examples I think of is her relationship with Scott. Now, I genuinely like Scott. I also am very aware of how unhealthy he was and probably still is, but there was a time when Kourtney and Scott were together and it seemed to start off really good. So they actually met before Keeping Up with the Kardashians again was a thing. They met in 2000, or they started dating, I believe, in 2006. I don't know how they met, but they started dating in 2006, and Scott is actually 4 years younger. So when Kourtney's in like her mid to older 20s, Scott's a young 20, and I think the family had a really hard time embracing and accepting him. Even for the first couple years of the show, you can see the disdain they have for him, the frustration they have for him. And I think part of that was because they saw the immaturity in him. I also think the family has really unique expectations when it comes to whoever the Kardashian Jenner people date, marry, or in relationship with. But that goes back to my thought of, I think because Kourtney and Scott had put so much out there and invited cameras into places they probably should never have been in, I think it created a lot of mistrust. It created a lot of disdain, and it created a lot of tension, and it created a relationship that became so unhealthy and so toxic that it just blew up, I think, in both of their faces. It seems like at the beginning, Kourtney was lovey-dovey and all over him and just really emotionally and intimately engaged with Scott. But over time, you see the disdain and you see the disconnect happening. And I think there's definitely a lot of things that contributed to that. However, when I'm looking over and thinking back through those years that Kourtney had let everybody and anything in, I think there's a lot of invalidation when it came to her relationship, when it came to her feelings. Something with Kourtney that I don't think is addressed enough is Kourtney's a sensitive person. And for so long, I feel like being sensitive has been used in a negative light or a negative way. But being sensitive, I think, is a unique way to feel and a unique connection to other people. And I think with Kourtney, one of her biggest struggles was because it wasn't validated and because it was often overlooked or looked at as being dramatic, I think it led to her shutting down, and it led to her being numb for years and years and years. So in the past few years, we haven't seen as much of Kourtney. We haven't been privy into the private life of Kourtney as much as we were. And I think part of that is because she had to undo a lot of things that were learned at the beginning of her life and at the beginning of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. If you watch Kris Jenner, if you watch a lot of how she moves and how she does business and what she teaches her kids to do, Kim has a lot of Kris in her. That's why I think Kourtney and Kim do not get along, is because Kim thinks a lot like Kris and Kourtney simply does not. But with Kris, it's more of put your emotions to the side and just do what you need to do to get the money that you want to get, and do it at any cost. And I think over time, Kourtney realized my peace is not worth the check that I'm getting. My peace is not worth, making sure that everybody else is happy. My peace is not worth, fill in the blank. And I think that's where Kourtney really struggled when filming Keeping Up with the Kardashians. And I think that's why there was such a harsh left turn that was made when filming. It seemed off for everybody else, but in my mind, I'm like, well, of course she did that, because you literally asked everything of her and she gave it. But then when it all went awry, when it all went wrong, or when it all went downhill, there was no one there to help kind of pick it up or help coach her or work her through it. And so she completely disconnected. Her relationships and the dynamics on the show have drastically changed over the years. And I think instead of finding a healthy balance, she went from one extreme to another extreme. I would say with Kourtney, one of the things I noticed too is her attachment style, which I think leads a lot into why she went from one extreme to another extreme. I would say she's probably, again, outside looking in, from what I know from reading and watching her. I don't know her personally. I would qualify her as a disorganized attachment style, meaning there are a couple things that I noticed. Number one, there's a sensitivity to rejection. I think with Kourtney, one of the things that she struggled with Scott and with, even her family is a sensitivity of feeling rejected, whether it's real or whether it's perceived. Disorganized attachment, they crave and they want intimacy and they want connection. But I think a lot of times they get in their own way because there's a sensitivity of they don't want me. I'm not wanted. I'm not needed. They want somebody else. They crave somebody else. And so it's like this back and forth. And I think that's what we saw a lot with Scott, where it's like when it was good, it was really good. But when it was bad, it was toxic and sometimes even harmful. And so I think that confusion within her led to the confusion of the relationship. And I think the dynamic between her and her siblings was also disorganized in the sense of like, when it comes to the whole Dolce & Gabbana drama with Kim and Kourtney, where, Dolce & Gabbana had basically sponsored, I feel like, Kourtney's wedding, but then they made a deal with Kim. Kim felt justified in her making a deal because she waited till after the wedding. Kourtney felt justified of being hurt and again being and feeling rejected by her sister because she picked a brand over her sister. In her mind, that sensitivity to rejection, I think, leads a lot of Kourtney's disdain and leads a lot of Kourtney's frustration and anger and just kind of harshness that we see sometimes. I think another thing with Kourtney that could possibly identify her as a disorganized attachment, there's a lot of distrust and abandonment issues. I think when, her mom had cheated on her dad, or when her dad had passed away, or when Scott had cheated, or when people in her life that she felt were closest to her had in her mind suddenly abandoned her or left her or rejected her, it created distrust of the world and those around her. And so those who were closest to her, she started pushing away because I think there's distrust that was being built. Or, somebody would do one wrong thing and they were cut out of Kourtney's life. And so I think for her, she's got to find that healthy balance of people are going to be people. People are going to mess up. People are going to make mistakes. Not everyone who makes a mistake, though, needs to be cut off. And so finding that balance of I know that they're human. I also know that I have boundaries. And I think that's the journey that Kourtney's been on, is finding boundaries. What do boundaries look like? What do mental boundaries look like? What do physical boundaries look like? Like, how much can they film? How much can they be a part of? And also, what do emotional and spiritual boundaries look like as well? And then last but not least, when it comes to disorganized attachment, I think that because of the inconsistency in relationship, at least in the past, again, when it was good with Scott, it was great with Scott. When it was bad with Scott, it was toxic and again, sometimes even harmful or hurtful with Scott. And so that inconsistency and the wanting of intimacy but not trusting, so it's holding us back from the intimacy, it's just back and forth and inconsistent. And that inconsistency that we saw is what made me believe, okay, there might be a disorganized attachment here. So that leads me to her relationships, her relationship dynamics. The first one we obviously think of and that I've talked about a little bit is Scott Disick. Like I mentioned, Scott Disick is 4 years younger than Kourtney. Another thing to note about Scott that I think is important is Kourtney is the oldest of 6 and Scott is an only child. Not only that, but Scott actually loses his parents. And during the Keeping Up with the Kardashians, there's a season where he's walking through grief and he actually loses his parents and doesn't have family. So where Kourtney comes from a big family and a very involved family, Scott comes from a very small family. And then when they pass, he almost feels like there is no family. And so with Scott and Kourtney, like I said, at the beginning, it seemed like it was good. It was healthy. It was fun. But I think there was a lot less pressure too. Although her family seemed to really struggle with him for the first couple of years of their relationship. The other problem with Scott was that he had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol and probably other stuff, but definitely alcohol. And that led to a lot of disdain. It led to a lot of mistrust. It led to a lot of stepping out. It led to a lot of things and situations that shouldn't have happened. And I think not that alcohol is ever an excuse, but sometimes it explains the behavior. And I think, unfortunately, Scott had a really hard time not dealing with the grief that he felt, not dealing with the disdain that her family had for him, not dealing with the fact that he feels so lost and so out of control. So I think for him, he had a really unhealthy way of coping and working through things, and that bled into Kourtney. I think with Kourtney, though, her struggle was communicating and letting him know, hey, I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. And I think she's definitely gotten there. But for years, there was always that well, I'll be there if you need me. And I think the Kardashian women struggle with this, where they feel like they have to take care of their person who is mentally, emotionally, and sometimes even physically sick, to the point of, though, it's harming them and they're no longer a healthy version of themselves. And I think with Kourtney, because Scott believed every time she was there or every time she would reach out that there was a chance, and there wasn't a chance in Kourtney's mind. So there was a lot of just disconnect and a lot of turbulence at the end of that relationship. I think even now it's kind of a sticky relationship in the sense of Kourtney's happy and moved on and married now, and Scott is no longer part of her life like that anymore. And I think he's still mourning that. I think he's still mourning the fact that he lost his parents and now he feels like he lost the mother of his children. Scott and Kourtney ended up having 3 kids together. They have Mason, Penelope, often known as P, and then they have Rain. It seemed like their official breakup had happened in 2015, but even between 2006 and 2015, a lot of back and forth, a lot of confusion, a lot of just mishaps and just unhealthy tension between the two. I would also say when she was dating Scott, her style, like how she dressed, was definitely New York prep. She wore the skirts, the blouses, the high heels, the tights, all of that, because Scott was a New Yorker. And I think that played a lot into how Kourtney dressed, and she found a lot of her identity in who he was. Then after they had broken up, there were some, allegations of her dating other people. But the next relationship that we are aware of is a French model by the name of Younes, and he's 14 years younger than her at this time. Now, her style completely changes, meaning she's dressing, to me personally, I think this was her best style, her best look, but she's dressing very high end and very much in the clothes that are very in and sleek and stunning and very trendy. Now, with her and Younes, there was barely anything filmed when it came to their relationship. And I found it so interesting because the producers and her family got so frustrated with her because she seemingly kept shutting them out of her life. Here's my thing though. I think because she let so many people in the first time, she was like, heck no, there's absolutely no way I'm doing this again, because whatever may happen of this, I want to protect it. I want to figure out how to put a barrier around it because it's not for anybody else to be a part of. Now, I understand when you're on reality TV, you show what you're doing, you let people in. I again think Kourtney went to the unhealthy extreme and let them in the most private and most sacred spaces. And this time she's like, nope, you're not coming into any spaces. I remember an episode when Kim and Khloe actually followed Kourtney to this meeting that she said she had. And it wasn't a meeting, but it was at, Younes' place. And they're like, why are you hiding this from me? I think the other problem that Kourtney faced, especially in the later years, was she felt like she was trying to put boundaries up and nobody was respecting the boundaries. Kim and Khloe always seemingly were like, well, we're putting a lot out there. We're doing this. And what are you doing? You're doing nothing. I think of the Christmas card shoot where Kim said to Kourtney, you're the least interesting to look at. But what was happening is Kourtney was saying, hey, I've got family things. I've got this. And to be honest, I get Kourtney's side, but I totally understand Kim as well. And so for Kim, she's like, no, we said this time, we made time for this to happen, and now you're bailing on us again. But in Kourtney's mind, she's like, no, I'm putting up boundaries and making my family a priority and making myself a priority, and not work obligations. For Kourtney, I think she struggled with the fact that people don't understand, nor do they respect any boundaries that I'm putting up. And so I think, again, she went to the extreme of having rigid boundaries. There is such a thing as having too rigid boundaries that are unhealthy. And I think that's where Kourtney was finding herself in the 2016, 17, 18, 19 era. So Younes and Kourtney were on and off till about 2019. And then we get into her rock era. In 2021, it is officially confirmed that Kourtney Kardashian and Travis Barker, the famous drummer of Blink-182, are dating. Now, there had been speculations for a long time before this, but they officially announced, oh yeah, we're dating. Apparently, these two had been friends for years. They had been neighbors for years, and they've known each other for a long time. Now, I started assuming they were dating when her style, yet again, had changed. Something so unique with the Kardashian women is you can tell who they're dating by how they dress, especially Kourtney and Kim. The rest, not as much. but Kourtney and Kim for sure. Now Kourtney's starting to wear a lot more black, a lot more like heavy metal things and these t-shirts. I'm like, have you ever listened to the band that you're wearing? And came off more edgy with her style. Now Travis Barker is 4 years older than her. They officially started dating in 2021 and they officially got married in 2022. Now, this was the wedding that I was talking about earlier with the Dolce & Gabbana debacle, where Dolce & Gabbana had literally like put on their wedding. Like they had done the dresses and I'm sure a lot of other things as well. I think all the sisters were wearing Dolce & Gabbana. And for me, it wasn't my favorite dress. She's stunning. I love Kourtney. I didn't love the dress. I wish it was something different, but that goes to show she's in her rock era, the short dress and the long veil and the high heels and all that stuff. But they ended up getting married. Now, Travis Barker has a family as well, where he has a few kids from other relationships and marriages. He was most notably married to Shannon Moakler, and they actually had their own reality TV show as well. Now, again, something interesting with Kourtney and Travis is how physical they are in public. I'm all about loving and PDA and, support your man and, do whatever. Theirs is to the degree, though, that, again, it's an extreme where Scott, it was like nothing. Travis, it's everything. Now, I will say, I think with Travis, she feels safe. I think with Travis, she feels heard and validated. And there's something about Travis that's probably calming to her and reassuring to her. With Scott and her family, I think it's a lot of chaos and a lot of noise. With Travis, it's a lot of like, let's meditate, let's have peace. Let's, even in his voice, when I heard him talk, I'm like, oh, that's how he sounds. So I do think there's a sense of safety and security that Travis brings to the relationship. Now, do I think it's like the best relationship? I have no idea. But do I think it's healthy? I do think it's actually a healthy relationship. A few reasons for this. And number one, again, he brings a calming presence to her. Number two, he's always defending her. I think the family never really stood up for Kourtney in the way that she had wanted them to. Number three, he validates her sensitivity. Travis is sensitive too. He's a feeler. Kourtney's a feeler. So I think they hopefully balance each other out though in that, where they don't just feel everything, but they also have like an ability to think and process things as well. But he definitely validates her feelings. And then I think number four, the other big thing for her is that he was a part of her therapy journey. Like he's gone through a lot of trauma himself. Travis had actually been through trauma as well, where he was actually part of a plane crash. And for years and years, he wouldn't step foot on a plane. But being with Kourtney, he ended up going back on a plane. So I think they were both on a healing journey together. They were choosing therapy. They were choosing treatments and things that were helpful for them, mind, body, and soul. And I think for her, that was the first time she felt validated and wanting to become healthier. Now, again, I don't know much about like anybody's therapy journey on the Kardashians, but it seems like Kourtney's probably the most open about her therapy journey. In this last season, she talks to her mom about therapy. And it's interesting because as she's talking to her mom about her therapy, the mom's dismissive of it and is invalidating in it. And it's like, okay, well, what's next? Okay, well, actually, and tries to veer away from the conversation that makes her uncomfortable, which is oddly enough going to therapy. So I do think Travis is somebody for her that makes her feel seen, heard, and connected to herself. Now, Travis and Kourtney actually just welcomed a son, Rocky, at the end of 2023. I don't think there's been any official pictures out and posted yet, but she had a baby when she's 44. And this is a baby that she has been trying for and wanting for a long time. Now, with Kourtney and Travis, I'm hoping that their families continue to learn how to blend. I think something that I saw a lot of in these past few seasons with Travis is, and I don't necessarily think it's his fault, but I think Penelope and Mason seem to have a hard time with Travis and the blending. And so I'm so happy that Rocky's here. I'm hoping though that Mason and Penelope and Rain don't feel disconnected from their mom and they don't feel disconnected from the family in general. I also hope that Kourtney is in a healthier space mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. I feel like Kourtney has experienced a lot of downs, but I feel like she's in a season of a lot of ups, whether it's having her baby, whether it's launching a successful vitamin line, the Lemmy line. I just feel like she's maybe finding her space and finding her sense of identity. I can't imagine being a sister of Kim or being a daughter of Kris. And I don't think it's malicious, but I do think it's a lot. And I think because Kourtney is so sensitive at heart, she maybe felt like she was drowning in their shadows. She maybe felt like she was drowning in their judgment. She maybe felt like she was drowning in their expectations and couldn't match them and couldn't make them. So she felt like she wasn't anybody. But I feel like she is feeling maybe more empowered and encouraged in who she is and how she operates. And I'm hoping that she continues the journey of therapy and just becoming the healthiest and best version of herself. All right, guys, that is it for me. That is Kourtney Kardashian through the lens of a therapist and somebody who loves all things reality TV. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Remember, if you like all things mental health, therapy, faith, pop culture, reality TV, then this might be the channel for you. I would love for you to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, turn on your notifications. That way you're notified when brand new videos are out and ready for you to view. Be sure to tune in next week for a brand new video. Until next time, guys.